The chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the Astoria Regency were not merely light fixtures. They were celestial bodies of cut crystal, weighing down the gilded air with the sheer gravity of wealth. Conversations murmured beneath them, a soft, predatory rustling of money and influence. Zariah Thompson moved through it all with the chilling precision of a ghost, her black uniform a stark shadow against the glittering tapestry of old money and new ambition. On her tray, glasses of champagne caught the light, each a tiny, fractured world of the opulence surrounding her. She was invisible, and that was her armor. Tonight was the Winter Legacy Gala, the crown jewel of New York's philanthropic season, hosted by the Bington Foundation and its founder, Marcus Bington, stood at the podium on stage, a titan in a bespoke tuxedo. The light caught the silver at his temples, making him look less like a man and more like a monument carved from granite and ambition. Legacy, Marcus's voice boomed, smooth and resonant, filling every corner of the vast room. It is not what we build for ourselves, but what we leave for others. It is the continuation of our values, our dreams, our family. He smiled, a practiced, benevolent expression that had graced the covers of Forbes and Time. His eyes scanned the crowd, a king surveying his court. Then, his gaze settled on a table near the back, partially obscured by an ostentatious spray of white orchids. He gestured towards it. My own legacy, of course, is my greatest treasure. My daughter, Celeste. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. A spotlight, as if on cue, swung to find the girl in the soft gold dress. Celeste Bington sat perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap, her expression a careful, curated blankness. She was beautiful, ethereal, a porcelain doll placed just so for display. Zariah paused mid-stride, her tray held steady by years of practice. She watched Marcus's face on the large screens flanking the stage. His smile was still there, but it had acquired a new, pitying quality. Celeste has faced challenges most of us can scarcely imagine, he continued, his tone shifting to one of solemn charity. She navigates a world of silence, a world without sound, and yet, she does so with a grace that inspires us all. The air grew thick with a collective, condescending sympathy. People turned to look at Celeste, their faces etched with the kind of soft, well-meaning pity that felt sharper than any insult. It is in her name, and for children like her, Marcus declared, his voice rising with theatrical emotion, that the Bington Foundation this year is launching the Sound of Hope initiative to provide cutting-edge auditory technologies to underprivileged youth, to give them the gift my own daughter can never truly have. The room erupted in applause, louder this time, infused with the self-congratulatory warmth of vicarious generosity. Zariah's eyes, however, were locked on Celeste. The girl's mask had not slipped, but Zariah saw the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her gaze dropped to the tablecloth, her knuckles white where she gripped the fabric of her dress. She was not an inspiration. She was a prop. Her father had just used her silence, her very being, as a fundraising tool. He had held up her perceived brokenness and sold it to the highest bidder. As Zariah turned away, the professional calm on her face a shield, the scene before her fractured. The clinking of glasses, the warm light, the murmur of the crowd, it all dissolved into a different memory, sharp and cold as a shard of glass. A smaller room. Years ago, fluorescent lights humming over a conference table. Her father, Daniel Thompson, a brilliant, gentle man with kind eyes and hands that were always sketching designs on napkins, sat opposite a younger Marcus Bington. Marcus was smiling that same benevolent, predatory smile. Daniel. It's just business, Marcus was saying, his voice a placating murmur. The board feels your vision is commercially unviable. We have to be practical. Practical. Her father's voice was strained, shaking with a disbelief that would later curdle into despair. Marcus, that code is my life's work. It's our work. You can't just cut me out. Claim it as your own. The company owns the intellectual property. Daniel, you signed the papers. Marcus slid a folder across the table. This is a generous severance package. It's for the best. For your family. Zariah, just a child then, had been waiting in the hallway, and she remembered the sound of the door closing, the sight of her father emerging, his face ashen. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. She remembered the months that followed the hushed, frantic phone calls, the mounting bills, the way the light slowly went out of her father's eyes. She remembered the headlines, spun by Bington's PR machine, Bington Tech parts ways, with co-founder amidst financial irregularities. It was a lie, a clean, corporate assassination that left no fingerprints, only a ruined man. The final image of the memory was the sharpest, her father. Months later, his heart giving out under the strain of a battle he never had the resources to fight. He died not from a sickness, but from a betrayal, delivered with a smile and a handshake by the man now standing on a stage accepting applause for his charity. Zariah's breath caught in her throat. She forced the memory back down, locking it away behind the iron door of her composure. She adjusted the champagne glasses on her tray. Her presence here tonight was no accident. The uniform was a disguise. The service was a means to an end. Her composure was not professionalism. It was the cold, patient calm of a predator who had been hunting her prey for a very long time. And she had just watched him commit a cruelty that echoed the one that had destroyed her own family. An immediate, visceral link to the girl in the gold dress snapped into place. Celeste Bington was not just a victim. She was a key. Zariah's world was a study in contrasts. By day, she served the city's elite, navigating the opulent labyrinth of five-star hotels and exclusive clubs, a silent observer in a world that refused to see her. By night, she returned to her Spartan apartment in a rapidly gentrifying corner of Queens, a space that was less a home and more a command center. The living room was dominated not by a sofa or a television, but by a massive corkboard that covered an entire wall. It was a chaotic spiderweb of names, dates, and corporate structures, all connected by colored string. At its center was a photograph of Marcus Bington, his face beaming from a magazine cover. Radiating out from him were lines connecting to shell corporations, patent filings, and newspaper clippings. Tucked into a corner was a faded, cherished photo of her father, Daniel Thompson, standing beside a much younger Marcus. They were smiling, arms slung around each other's shoulders, a portrait of a partnership on the cusp of changing the world, before one of them decided to claim it all for himself. Her life was a meticulous performance of a double identity. To the world, she was Zariah Thompson, a hard-working, unassuming catering waitress, saving up for community college. She was polite, efficient, and utterly forgettable. But here, in the cold glow of her laptop monitor, she was the sole archivist of her father's stolen legacy. For years, she had educated herself, not in a classroom, but through the unforgiving curriculum of the internet. She learned corporate law, forensic accounting, and coding specifically, the foundational language her father had invented, the very architecture upon which the multi-billion-dollar empire of Bington Technologies was built. She lived on the fringes, surviving on meager paychecks and a burning, disciplined rage that she channeled into research. Every dollar she saved went not towards a future, but towards rectifying the past. She had methodically pieced together the story of Marcus's betrayal, tracing the flow of money, the theft of intellectual property, the campaign of slander that had erased her father from history. She knew Marcus Bington better than his own board of directors. She knew his habits, his vulnerabilities, his secrets. What she lacked was proof, a smoking gun, something undeniable that could penetrate the fortress of wealth and power he had built around himself. Across the city, in a penthouse that floated above Manhattan like a private kingdom, Celeste Bington lived in a different kind of isolation. Her world was silent, but her mind was loud. Her bedroom had been converted into an art studio, the walls covered in canvases, the air thick with the scent of turpentine and acrylic paint. Her art was her voice, a vibrant, screaming articulation of a life lived behind glass. Her paintings were not pretty landscapes or delicate portraits. They were raw, emotional, and complex. One piece, a massive canvas titled Static, depicted a crowd of featureless, talking mouths, their words rendered as jagged, gray lines, while in the center, a girl's hands were elegantly forming a sign, the colors around them brilliant and explosive. Another, a digital illustration, showed a girl trapped inside a soundproof bell jar, her fists beating against the invisible walls as a smiling man unmistakably. Her father polished the outside of the glass for an admiring audience. Her interactions with the world were strained and transactional. Tutors came and went. Interpreters were hired for public appearances, their presence a constant reminder of the chasm between her and everyone else. Her father communicated with her through his assistant, via emails and typed notes left on the kitchen counter. He provided everything: the best education, the finest clothes, a limitless credit card, everything except his time, his effort, his understanding. He loved her, she supposed. In the abstract way one loves a valuable, fragile possession. He was proud of her survival, but he was ashamed of her difference. And so, she had retreated into her art, the only place where she felt truly, completely understood, the only place where her silence had weight, color, and meaning. Back at the gala, after Marcus's speech, the performative sympathy directed at Celeste had subsided, leaving her once again in her familiar state of decorative isolation. Guests would occasionally glance her way, offering a tight, awkward smile before turning back to their hushed, important conversations. Zariah watched from across the room as Celeste meticulously cut a piece of salmon on her plate, her movements precise and contained. The girl hadn't looked up since the spotlight had left her. Zariah felt that same protective fire that had sparked the moment she saw Marcus use his daughter as a pawn. Her plan had always been a solitary one, a methodical dismantling of an empire from the outside. But seeing Celeste, she realized she had been missing a piece of the puzzle. The key to the castle wasn't in the boardroom. It was sitting right here, ignored in a corner. Taking a deep breath, Zariah straightened her uniform and walked toward Celeste's table. This was a deviation from her carefully constructed plan, a risk. But some risks were necessary. She approached quietly, circling the table until she was in Celeste's line of sight. She waited patiently until the girl finally lifted her head. Celeste's eyes, dark and intelligent, widened in surprise. She expected a wave, a mouthed, meaningless pleasantry. Instead, Zariah offered a small, genuine smile. She set her empty tray down on a nearby stand, then lifted her hands. "Hello," Zariah signed, her movements a little rusty but clear. "My name is Zariah. Are you okay?" For a moment, Celeste simply stared, her fork hovering in midair. A flicker of disbelief crossed her face, then confusion, then a dawning, radiant light that seemed to chase the shadows from her eyes. She put her fork down slowly, her entire posture shifting from one of rigid defense to one of tentative hope. She signed back, her fingers moving with a fluid grace that made Zariah's attempts look clumsy. "You know ASL." Zariah nodded, a real grin spreading across her face. "A little. My cousin taught me. I'm out of practice." A laugh, silent but expressive, shook Celeste's shoulders. It was the most beautiful thing Zariah had seen all night. For the next few minutes, they conversed in a quiet bubble of their own creation. They talked about the ridiculously large floral arrangements, the terrible music, the blandness of the salmon. It was simple, trivial conversation. Yet, it felt monumental. It was the first real conversation Celeste had had all evening. Their exchange was brief, but it did not go unnoticed. From across the room, Marcus Bington watched, his benevolent smile tightening at the edges. He saw the waitress, an employee, engaging with his daughter. He saw Celeste's animated expression, a level of unguarded joy he hadn't witnessed in years. He didn't see a moment of human connection. He saw an intrusion, a variable he couldn't control, a crack in the carefully curated image of his family. He discreetly pulled out his phone and sent a text to the head of hotel security, a man whose loyalty he had purchased long ago. The waitress at table 12, black, tall, hair in a bun. "She's being overly familiar with my daughter. Handle it." Minutes later, as Zariah was leaving Celeste's table, a stern-faced manager intercepted her near the service entrance. "Thompson," he said, his voice low and clipped. "There's been a complaint. Mr. Bington's office. You're done for the night. Pack your things." Zariah froze. "A complaint? I didn't do anything." "You were fraternizing with a high-profile guest? It's unprofessional," the manager said, avoiding her eyes. "It's not my call. Just go." There was no argument to be made, no union to appeal to, in this world. The quiet, frictionless exercise of power was absolute. A single text message from a man like Marcus Bington could erase a person's livelihood. Zariah walked to the staff locker room, her body moving on autopilot. The rage that simmered beneath her surface was now a cold, hard diamond of resolve. Marcus had not just fired a waitress. He had mistaken a ghost for a servant. He had personally attacked the one person who knew his original sin. He had, in his casual arrogance, just thrown a lit match into a room filled with gasoline. Zariah's meticulous, long-term plan for justice had just become a personal, immediate war for revenge. The termination was a setback, but Zariah was a strategist. Every obstacle was merely a problem awaiting a solution. Being fired from the catering company severed her proximity to Marcus's social life, but it also freed her from the charade of being a low-wage service worker. It was time to escalate. It was time to get inside the machine itself. Her new target, Bington Technologies, the gleaming, glass and steel monolith on the west side of Manhattan that served as the heart of Marcus's empire. Gaining access would be difficult. But Zariah had an advantage. She understood the company's digital architecture better than most of its current employees, because she had spent years studying her father's original designs. She scrubbed her public-facing online presence, crafting a new digital identity. Zariah Thompson, the ambitious, slightly overqualified candidate for an entry-level position in the digital archives department. The job was a glorified data entry role, a dead-end position most career track employees would ignore. But it offered one invaluable asset: access to the company's historical servers. It was a digital graveyard where old projects, forgotten emails, and buried secrets went to die. She tailored her resume, highlighting a fictional internship at a data management firm and fabricating references that led to burner phones she controlled. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Her interview was with a mid-level HR manager who was more interested in filling a quota than in rigorous vetting. Zoraya played the part perfectly, eager, bright, and grateful for the opportunity to get a foot in the door at such a prestigious company. She was hired. Her first day felt like stepping into the belly of the beast. The lobby was a cathedral of commerce, all white marble and hushed reverence. Employees moved through the sterile corridors with a uniform, anxious energy. Zoraya was assigned a small, windowless cubicle in the sub-basement, a fluorescent-lit purgatory where the company's past was stored on humming servers. Her presence, however, did not go entirely unnoticed. The final stage of her hiring process had included a security background check run by David Chen, Bington's notoriously thorough head of corporate security. Chen was ex-military intelligence, a man who saw patterns where others saw randomness. Zoraya's file was clean, too clean. A candidate with her supposed skills taking such a low-level job was an anomaly. It was a loose thread. Chen made a note in her file monitor. Zoraya was aware she was being watched. She saw Chen's eyes on security monitors when she passed through the lobby. She noticed the subtle digital trackers on the archival system, logging every file she accessed. So, she played the part of a diligent, slightly bored archivist. For weeks, she did nothing but her assigned work, digitizing old press releases, cataloging marketing materials from the 90s. Mind-numbing work. But with every keystroke, she was learning the system's layout, its firewalls, its backdoors, and, late at night, from her apartment, using encrypted connections, she began to carefully, patiently, probe the edges of the network, looking for a way in. Her first break came not from a server, but from a forgotten employee newsletter from 20 years ago, in a group photo from the company's fledgling days. She saw him, a young engineer, standing next to her father. A name was listed in the caption, Elias Vance. A quick search revealed he had been one of her father's lead programmers. He had been fired for insubordination 3 weeks after Daniel Thompson was forced out. Another piece of the collateral damage from Marcus's coup. Finding him was difficult. He had fallen off the grid, professionally. But Zoraya was a relentless researcher. She found him living in a quiet suburb in New Jersey, working as a freelance IT consultant. She approached him cautiously, meeting him in a sterile, anonymous diner halfway between the city and his home. Elias was a husk of the smiling man in the photograph. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes filled with a weary cynicism. He was suspicious, guarded. "I don't talk about Bington Tech," he said, stirring his coffee without looking at her. "I know what Marcus did to my father," Zoraya said quietly, sliding the old photograph across the table. "To Daniel Thompson." Elias froze, his eyes locking on the picture. He looked from her father's face to hers, and for the first time, he saw the resemblance. The fire that had been extinguished in him for 2 decades flickered to life. "He destroyed a good man," Elias whispered, his voice thick with old anger. "Daniel was the visionary. Marcus was just the salesman. He stole it all." Elias became her first true ally. He was her link to the past, a living repository of the company's original sins. He provided her with old schematics, details about the foundational code her father wrote, and, most importantly, the names of other loyalists who had been purged. Her second ally came from the world of journalism. Rebecca Ferris was a tenacious investigative reporter at an online news outlet, known for her deep dives into corporate corruption. Zoraya contacted her anonymously, using an encrypted email service. She began feeding Rebecca a steady stream of carefully curated information, not enough to reveal her hand, but enough to pique the journalist's interest. She sent hints about patent discrepancies, financial irregularities in the company's early years, creating a public narrative that would lay the groundwork for her final attack. Meanwhile, Zariah needed to re-establish contact with the person on the inside Celeste. It was the most dangerous part of her plan. She purchased a burner phone and, using information from Celeste's rarely used public social media, deduced the name of the private art supply store in Soho that delivered to the Bington penthouse. Zariah paid the delivery driver a handsome sum to include the small, sealed package with Celeste's next order of canvases. Inside the package was the phone, pre-programmed with a single secure messaging app, and a note. Celeste. It's Zariah, the waitress from the gala. I was fired because of your father. He is not the man the world thinks he is. If you want to know the truth, use this phone. No one can trace it. For 3 agonizing days, there was no response. Zariah feared she had miscalculated, that Celeste was too afraid or too loyal. Then, one night, the phone buzzed. A single message appeared on the screen. Tell me everything. A secret alliance was forged. Celeste, trapped in her gilded cage, became Zariah's eyes and ears. She was clever and observant. She began to secretly photograph documents her father left on his desk in his home office, financial statements, private emails, drafts of contracts. She relayed snippets of conversations she observed, her understanding of lip reading proving to be a powerful intelligence-gathering tool. For the first time in her life, Celeste felt a sense of agency, of power. She was no longer a passive victim. She was an active participant in the fight for justice. With Elias's technical knowledge, Rebecca's public pressure, and Celeste's inside access, Zariah's spiderweb of information on the corkboard grew denser. The full, ugly picture of Marcus's betrayal came into sharp focus. He had not just stolen the code. He had systematically created a false paper trail, filing fraudulent patents and backdating documents to write Daniel Thompson completely out of the company's history. He had built his entire legacy on the foundation of a lie, and the ghost of the man he had destroyed was now, through his daughter, coming back to haunt him. The deeper Zariah dug, the more she felt she was excavating a tomb. The secrets were old and buried under layers of corporate jargon and legal obfuscation. One night, while cross-referencing old financial records provided by Elias with timelines from her father's journals, she noticed a massive, unexplained wire transfer from one of Bington's offshore accounts. The date was significant, November 14th. 20 years ago. It was the day after Daniel Thompson was officially terminated. But what truly chilled her was the recipient, a private investigator known for his skill in reputation management, a corporate euphemism for blackmail and sabotage. This confirmed that her father's professional ruin wasn't just a ruthless business maneuver. It was a planned, malicious attack. This discovery pushed her to look beyond the business dealings. She began to investigate the personal events of that period. That's when she found it. Buried in the digital archives of a local New Jersey newspaper, a small article about a single vehicle accident. The date was November 20th, less than a week after her father was pushed out. A car had skidded off a rain-slicked road and hit a tree. The driver, Marcus Bington, had sustained minor injuries. His wife, Lillian Bington, was killed instantly. Their 3-year-old daughter, Celeste, survived but suffered severe head trauma, resulting in profound, permanent hearing loss. The official police report, which Zariah paid a contact to pull from the county records, was brief. Marcus had claimed a tire had blown out. The case was closed, but Zariah's instincts screamed that it was too neat, too convenient. The timing was too coincidental. She sent a coded message to Celeste, asking a question that felt both cruel and necessary. Do you remember anything about the accident? Anything at all? Celeste's reply came hours later. No, just darkness. But my mother, she kept diaries. He has them locked in his safe. The safe? Another fortress to breach. But Celeste was resourceful. She sent Zariah photos of the safe, its make and model, using the specifications. Zariah and Elias spent days researching its vulnerabilities. Elias, remembering Marcus's penchant for using significant dates as passwords, suggested a series of combinations. The date Bington Tech was founded, the date of their first IPO, Marcus's birthday. One night, while Marcus was at a late-night dinner meeting, Celeste knelt before the heavy steel door of the safe in her father's study. Her hands trembled as she entered the combinations Elias had provided. The first failed. The second. The third. Then she tried the last one Zariah had suggested. A gut feeling, more than a logical deduction. The date her father had been forced out of the company. With a soft, sickening click, the safe unlocked. Inside, beneath stacks of stock certificates and property deeds, was a collection of leather-bound journals, Lillian Bington's diaries. Celeste began to photograph the pages, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and vindication. She focused on the entries from the weeks leading up to the crash. What she found was devastating. Lillian had known about the betrayal. She had been horrified by what her husband had done to Daniel Thompson, a man she considered a friend. November 15th. One entry read, "Marcus confessed everything tonight. He calls it a business decision. I call it theft. He destroyed Daniel and his family. He has become a monster I no longer recognize." And then, the final entry, dated the morning of the crash. November 20th. We had a terrible argument. I told him I couldn't live with this lie. I'm taking Celeste to my sister's. I have copies of Daniel's original design documents in the car. I told him if he doesn't make it right, I will. We're leaving this house of lies today. Zariah read the transcript Celeste sent, her blood turning to ice. The accident wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of a furious, desperate argument. Marcus hadn't just been driving. He had been driving away from the implosion of his life, his wife threatening to expose him. He hadn't just lost control of the car. He had lost control of everything. His cruelty toward Celeste, his inability to connect with her, his use of her deafness as a tool for public sympathy. It all snapped into a horrifying new focus. Celeste wasn't just a reminder of his broken family. She was a living, breathing monument to his guilt, a constant, silent testament to the moment his ambition had cost him everything. He had been punishing her for 2 decades for surviving the crash that he had caused. The steady drip of Rebecca Ferris's articles was beginning to erode the public's perception of Marcus Bington. Her stories, sourced from Zariah's anonymous tips, raised questions about the true origins of Bington Tech's core technology and hinted at a shadowy co-founder who had been written out of the company's official history. The narrative was shifting. Marcus, once untouchable, was now on the defensive. He grew paranoid. He felt the walls closing in, a sense of being hunted that he couldn't shake. He ordered David Chen to launch a full-scale internal investigation, a digital witch hunt to find the source of the leaks. Chen, ruthlessly efficient, intensified his surveillance. He ran deep-level forensic analyses on the company servers and cross-referenced access logs with employee communications. The net began to tighten around Zariah's small circle of conspirators. Chen's investigation led him to an anomaly in the network traffic originating from an external IP address in New Jersey. It was Elias Vance. Chen's team descended on Elias's quiet suburban life. They didn't come with police warrants. They came with corporate lawyers and non-disclosure agreements that carried the threat of financial ruin. Elias, panicked and outmatched, buckled under the pressure. Before they confiscated his devices, he managed to send one last, frantic message to Zariah's secure phone. "They know, Chen. They're here. Destroy everything. The message was a death knell for Zariah's carefully laid timeline. Her key witness was compromised. Her access to historical data was likely cut off. Chen would be tracing every digital footprint Elias had left, and it was only a matter of time before he found his way to Zariah. She had planned to spend months gathering more evidence, building an airtight case that would lead to criminal charges. Now, she had days, maybe hours. Her plan was no longer a methodical siege. It had to become a frontal assault. Her only remaining option was the upcoming annual shareholder meeting, scheduled in 2 days. It was Marcus's biggest stage, a televised event where he would unveil his new legacy project Synapse, a revolutionary AI-driven communications platform. Zariah knew from her father's old notes that Synapse was the ultimate realization of his original vision, the very technology Marcus had stolen and was now rebranding as his own crowning achievement. It was a desperate, high-stakes gamble. She no longer had the element of surprise on her side. Chen would be locking down every system, watching every access point. But the meeting was also Marcus's moment of greatest vulnerability. He would be on a live, global stage, exposed and overconfident. Zariah looked at the corkboard in her apartment, the web of strings and photos that represented years of her life. Her rage was now a cold, clear flame. There would be no more hiding in the shadows. She would not let Marcus Bington bury her father's legacy a second time. She was going to take everything from him, not in a quiet courtroom, but in the full, unforgiving glare of the world he had built for himself. The war was coming to his front door. The ballroom at Bington Tower was a theater of corporate power. Tiered rows of seats faced a stage where a massive, high-definition screen glowed with the company logo. The air hummed with the low thrum of servers and the quiet, anticipatory murmur of investors, analysts, and journalists. Board members sat in the front row, their faces impassive masks of wealth. In the wings, Marcus Bington adjusted his tie, a confident smile fixed on his face. Today, with the launch of Synapse, he would cement his legacy as a visionary genius. Zariah moved through the pre-event reception, not as a waitress, but as a guest. She wore a tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe, professional style. Her credentials, a high-level press pass for a tech blog Rebecca Ferris had created for this exact purpose, were flawless. She moved with an unnerving calm, her eyes scanning the room, noting camera positions, security placements, and the location of David Chen, who stood near the stage, his gaze sweeping the crowd like a hawk. Her heart pounded a steady, cold rhythm against her ribs. Elias, before he was taken, had given her one last gift, a master access key, a piece of backdoor code he had built into the network decades ago as a failsafe, a digital ghost key that he had never told anyone about. It would grant her a few precious, untraceable minutes inside the presentation software. It was a one-shot weapon. As the attendees took their seats, Zariah found a position at a press table near the back, giving her a clear line of sight to the main screen and proximity to an Ethernet port. She opened her laptop, the screen reflecting the cool determination in her eyes. The lights dimmed. A slickly produced video filled the screen, showcasing Bington Tech's achievements. Then, Marcus walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. "Today is not just about a new product," he began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "It's about the future of human connection. It's about giving a voice to the voiceless." Zariah's fingers flew across her keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. She initiated the connection, the ghost key slipping past Chen's firewalls like a whisper. The system was open. She had 90 seconds. On stage, Marcus was building to his crescendo. "I give you." Synapse. The screen behind him was meant to explode with the sleek, new Synapse logo. Instead, it flickered and went black. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. Marcus froze, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. David Chen spoke urgently into his wrist communicator. Then, a new image appeared on the screen. It was a scanned document, a schematic of a neural network, dated 21 years ago. At the bottom, a signature was clearly visible: Daniel P. Thompson. The screen changed again. A side-by-side comparison: Daniel Thompson's original code next to the foundational code for Synapse. They were nearly identical. "What is this?" a board member in the front row demanded. Marcus stared at the screen, his face draining of color. "Technical difficulties," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. The next slide was an email, sent from Marcus to his lawyers 2 decades ago. "We need to ensure all of Thompson's patents are fully absorbed. His name cannot appear on any public-facing documents." Panic began to ripple through the room. Investors were murmuring, pulling out their phones. Rebecca Ferris was already typing furiously, her story going live. Zariah uploaded the final piece of her attack: the scanned bank records, showing the payment to the reputation management firm, followed by the newspaper headlines detailing her father's professional disgrace. The story was now complete. The theft, the cover-up, the character assassination. Marcus stood paralyzed on the stage, exposed under the harsh lights. "This is a lie, a corporate espionage attack," he yelled, his voice cracking. David Chen and his team were frantically trying to regain control of the system. But it was too late. The damage was done. Zariah's 90 seconds were up. She closed her laptop, her part in this phase of the attack complete. But it wasn't over. As Chen's team finally managed to kill the feed, the screen went black for a second time. And then, it flickered back to life with a new video source. Not from Zariah's laptop, but from an external, encrypted feed. The face of Celeste Bington filled the massive screen. She was in her studio, poised and resolute. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at her father. She didn't sign. She didn't need to. In front of her, on an easel, was one of her mother's leather-bound diaries, open to the final, damning page. A calm, female voice, a pre-recorded interpreter, filled the auditorium, reading Lillian Bington's words aloud. "We had a terrible argument. I told him I couldn't live with this lie. I have copies of Daniel's original design documents in the car. I told him if he doesn't make it right, I will. We're leaving this house of lies today." A wave of shock washed over the audience. This was no longer about corporate theft. It was about something far darker. On screen, Celeste met her father's horrified gaze. For the first time, he was seeing her not as his broken, silent daughter, but as the living witness to his oldest and most terrible secret. She then lifted her hands and signed 2 words directly to him, her movements sharp and final. "No more." The feed cut out. In the ensuing pandemonium, as security rushed the stage and board members shouted into their phones, Marcus Bington simply stood there, a statue of a man whose entire world had just been shattered by the 2 women he had wronged most. He didn't see the investors fleeing or the journalists scrambling. All he could see was the ghost of his partner and the fierce, powerful eyes of the daughter he had never truly known. Zariah slipped out of the ballroom amidst the chaos, her face a mask of cold, quiet victory. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. News of the scandal broke like a tidal wave, wiping out Bington Technologies' stock value in a matter of hours. The hashtags, Josh Bington Betrayal and justice for Daniel Thompson trended globally. Marcus Bington, the celebrated titan of industry, became a pariah overnight. Federal investigators, armed with the evidence Zariah had provided to Rebecca Ferris, swarmed Bington Tower. Marcus was arrested, not in a dramatic standoff, but quietly, in his empty penthouse. The charges ranging from securities fraud and patent infringement to obstruction of justice related to the decades-old car crash. The empire he had built on a foundation of lies crumbled into dust. Days later, Zariah met Celeste in her art studio. The penthouse, once a symbol of oppressive wealth, was now just a quiet, sunlit space overlooking a city that had moved on. The air was thick with the smell of paint and the unspoken weight of their shared history. They didn't speak for a long time. Instead, Celeste led Zariah through her collection of paintings, each one a chapter in a story Zariah now fully understood. Finally, they sat by the large window, the city sprawling beneath them. "He's going to prison," Celeste typed on her phone, showing the screen to Zariah. "Everything he built is gone." There was no triumph in her words, only a heavy sense of finality. "It wasn't about destroying him," Zariah said softly, meeting her gaze. "It was about revealing the truth. My father deserved his name back, and you deserve to be free." "What happens now?" Celeste typed. "Now," Zariah replied, a flicker of a new kind of determination in her eyes. "We build something better." Zariah's revenge had never been solely about annihilation. It was about restoration. She worked with a consortium of ethical investors and the remnants of the Bington board to restructure the company. She used her deep understanding of her father's work and her newfound leverage as the heir to his intellectual property to guide the process, she argued, not for the dissolution of the company, but for its rebirth. They would salvage the technology, the good parts of her father's vision, and redirect it toward a purpose that was not about profit, but about progress. It was a complex, arduous process, navigating the legal and financial wreckage. But Zariah was no longer just a ghost seeking vengeance. She was a leader, fueled by a clear and powerful sense of justice. She chose not to take an executive role in the new company, but instead negotiated a massive settlement, directing the funds to establish a new, independent foundation. Months later, the city was alive with the familiar buzz of a New York evening. But tonight, the energy was focused on a new gallery in the heart of the arts district. The clean, minimalist sign over the door read, "The Daniel Thompson Foundation for Ethical Innovation." Inside, a diverse crowd of artists, technologists, journalists, and students mingled. The walls were adorned with brilliant, challenging, and beautiful works of art. At the front of the gallery, Zariah, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, stood at a small podium. "My father believed that technology should be a tool for connection, for empathy, for lifting people up," she said, her voice clear and steady. For too long, his legacy was buried. Tonight, we begin to unearth it, not just by honoring his name, but by celebrating a new generation of visionaries who use their voices to challenge the world. She smiled and gestured to the young woman standing beside her. "It is my profound honor to introduce the inaugural artist of the Thompson Foundation Gallery, a voice of incredible power and clarity, Celeste Bington." A wave of heartfelt applause filled the room. Celeste stepped forward, her face radiant with a confidence that seemed to light up the space around her. She signed her thanks, her movements fluid and eloquent, an interpreter's voice giving sound to her words of gratitude and hope. Together, they walked to the gallery's far wall, where the final piece of the exhibit was covered by a velvet cloth, with a shared look of understanding. They pulled the cloth away. The painting was a massive diptych. 2 panels joined to tell a single, powerful story. The left panel depicted 2 young men, one with kind, dreaming eyes, the other with a sharp, ambitious smile, shaking hands against the backdrop of a blueprint-covered table. It was a portrait of partnership, of a brilliant, hopeful beginning. The right panel depicted 2 young women, standing together in an art studio flooded with morning light. They weren't looking back at the past, but forward, out of the canvas, toward an unseen but promising future. It was a portrait of legacy, reborn and reclaimed. Zariah and Celeste stood side by side, looking at the painting that told the story of their fathers, and the story of them. The silence between them was no longer a void, but a space filled with shared strength, mutual respect, and the quiet, unbreakable bond of 2 women who had taken the wreckage of the past and built something new, something true, something that would last.